Myth number 1. A squad of T1s can push a mouse. So I guess that everyone who plays World of Tanks already knows that the mouse is the heaviest tank in the entire game. So there must be no way for some tiny little tier 1 tanks to push this massive behemoth forwards, right? Well, let's find out. So on paper, this is mostly about the horsepower to ton ratio. Of course, there are other factors involved such as ground resistance, but since ground resistance only has a very minor effect on the outcome of this myth, we left it out for this time. So as I already said, on paper, in order for this to work, the T1 simply have to equal or exceed the horsepowers of the mouse's own engine in order to make it mobile. So let me give you guys an example of what I mean. So the mouse by itself weighs about 188 tons and has a 1750 horsepower engine, which gives it a horsepower to ton ratio of around 9.3. So in order to move the mouse roughly at its normal speed, we need enough T1 Gunninghams to equal that 9.3 horsepower to ton ratio. So let's take a look at the mobility stats of only one T1, which weighs 7.5 tons and has a 132 horsepower engine. So divide 1750 by 132 and you get rounded up 14, which means that horsepower wise 14 T1 Gunningham engines should even more than equal the mouse's 1750 horsepower engine, which means that on paper 14 T1s should be enough to push the mouse out of its place. But is that also the case in World of Tanks? Well, let's find out. So to test this out, we went out to Himmelsdorf and started out this experiment lightly by using 23 T1s instead of 14 to make it a lot easier to test and more error proof. And at the first test, we first started off by pushing the mouse off its place with a little help of gravity by positioning the mouse on a slight slope, and after some organization the mouse did indeed started to move. So technically this myth is already confirmed, but I decided to step it up a notch and actually try and see if the T1s could push a mouse entirely off a flipping cliff. So we tried that as well, just as a little bonus. So we went out to Himmelsdorf again and I set off my mouse sideways in the gap of the well-known Himmelsdorf cliff fall. So here we go, the moment of truth. The T1s line up and start to push on my side, and after it almost went wrong and the T1s blew up, they eventually managed to give me the required horsepower to move me towards the drop, and boom, there we go. Me and the mouse together with 21 T1s all crashed down the hill, resulting in a massive explosion. So, conclusion. Yes, as you could clearly see on the test footage, it is indeed possible for a squad of T1s to push a mouse out of its place and even crash it down a flipping cliff. As long as you have enough T1s to make up for the mouse's own engine power, it should be doable. So therefore, I can safely say that this myth is confirmed. Myth number 2. You can kill all of a tank's crew members without destroying the actual tank. So this has to be probably one of the most requested myths since I started my Mythbusters series, and I kept postponing it over and over again because I thought it was way too difficult and RNG based to actually do it. But that was up until this episode, where I just now suddenly realized that this myth is a lot easier to test with vehicles that only have 2 crew members. So with that in mind, I sketched out the plan as followed. At first, I looked for the tank with the most HP that only had 2 crew members, to get as many shots as possible on it before it runs out of HP and gets destroyed. And after some searching, I came to the conclusion that the ELC AMX with its 3020 hit points is the most ideal candidate for this experiment. So next up, I needed a tank with the least possible alpha damage and the most possible module damage, which could be a lot of different tanks, but eventually I decided to go for the Panzer B2. So for the map it didn't really matter, so I just picked Ensk to save me and my testing squad some time with driving. And once all that was done and set up, the last thing that I had to do was looking at the ELC AMX module map, find out where the commander and driver are located in this tank so I know where to shoot, which now only leaves us with the test results. So here we go. The first couple of ELCs I shot didn't go so well, since you do gotta keep in mind that RNG plays a huge role in this, but after a couple of failed attempts I finally managed to take down the ELC's driver, and a couple of shots later its commander as well, and this happened. So the first thing that I noticed was the vehicle destroyed notification on the bottom of my screen, but the tank itself seems fully intact as well, as it didn't turn into a wreck. But the ELC could not do anything, I was just like a sitting duck. And the first thing this reminded me of was drowning, because if you drown a vehicle, basically the same thing happens. The enemy that drowned you gets the kill, you can't move and are pretty much out of the game. But if someone happens to shoot at your tank, they still would gain damage from it, and that was exactly the case in this situation as well. But this got me wondering, are you able to use your medkit to fix the crew members when all of them get knocked out, or is it just like drowning where you can't and it's simply game over? Well, maybe this is an interesting one to test in the next episode, but for now, let's get straight into the conclusion of this myth. So, conclusion. If you manage to kill or knock out every single crew member of an enemy vehicle, the enemy vehicle becomes unplayable, but it still remains its hit points, just like if you were to drown it. But you do get a kill for it, and the vehicle destroyed notification does pop up, which means that this myth is sadly enough busted. Myth number 3. A Spall liner reduces fall damage. So I found this myth to be rather interesting, and I think it could be possible as well, since the description of a Spall liner says that it reduces HE damage, stun time and ram damage. Does that also include fall damage or not, since ramming is a tank to tank collision and falling is a tank to terrain collision? So does this work the same way, or are those physics slightly different? Well, let's find out. So to set up this experiment, I opened up a training room and I picked a whole variety of tanks with all different kinds of Spall liners, from light all the way up to super heavy Spall liners in pairs of 2, with one tank of a pair equipped with a Spall liner and the other tank of the same pair without a Spall liner. And I split it up every pair and put them into different teams, which results into team 1 being all equipped with their designated type of Spall liner and team 2 being equipped with nothing at all. So you end up with 2 teams built out of the exact same tanks as the other team, but obviously team 1 equipped with and team 2 equipped without a Spall liner. And to make this test as balanced as possible, I made sure that all tanks chosen only have a 100% crew with no skill strains, and that all tanks had no equipment whatsoever except for the Spall liners on team 1. And also that each and every tank is as stock as possible. So then for the map I choose to test this on Paris because of the southern bridge that is pretty much flat with no weird bumps, and that has a fall that is just high enough that it won't kill a tank instantly, to eliminate as many other factors that could play a role into the outcome of this myth. And at last we made sure that each and every tank got the same run up, so they had the same distance to accelerate, so they could crash down with about the same speed, to furthermore eliminate any other factors. So now, with the testing setup explained, let's get straight into the testing. So first up are both T49s, with the green one equipped with the light Spall liner. So here we go, they both crash down, and it looks like surprisingly the T49 without the Spall liner actually receives less damage than the T49 with the Spall liner. And by the way, I'll put all the exact values of the damage loss at the left side of your screen so you can easily keep track of the results, while we move on to the second test with both E50Ms. Again, the green E50M has a medium Spall liner equipped and the red E50M has no Spall liner equipped. And weirdly enough, the E50M with the Spall liner doesn't receive any damage at all, while the E50M without the Spall liner loses 813 HP, which is the complete opposite of the T49's results. That's pretty weird. But anyways, let's just continue to move on to test number 3 with the AMX 50Bs, with of course the green one again being equipped with a heavy Spall liner. And similar results to the E50M, again the 50B with the Spall liner does receive damage as well, but quite a bit less than the 50B without the Spall liner. So let's now step up another notch, with now being the E100's turn, with again the green one equipped with a super heavy Spall liner. And this time the E100 with the Spall liner receives a lot more damage than the E100 without the Spall liner, and the same story goes for the test with the Jagdpanzer E100. But once we move on to the IS-7 test, it has the same results as the E50M's test, but the other way around. So to be honest, I don't know what to think of this myth, since the test results are literally all over the place, so I guess it's obvious that a Spall liner doesn't make a difference in receiving fall damage. But what is the main factor that determines fall damage then? Well, after observing the footage a bit closer, I concluded that it's a mix of two factors, with a 50-50 cut that determines how much fall damage you will receive, which are 50% landing and 50% RNG. And a perfect example of this is the Jagdpanzer E100's test fall, since if you look closely you can see that the right Jagdpanzer E100 partially lands on its front track wheels, therefore the track absorbs some of its total fall damage, which obviously takes the track right off. But that does result into the Jagdpanzer E100 only losing 780 of its hit points. But if we take a look at the other Jagdpanzer E100 that jumped at the same time, we can see that that Jagdpanzer E100 landed on its front hull, resulting into losing a whopping 1820 hit points, because the tracks couldn't absorb any of the taken damage, which you can clearly see because the left Jagdpanzer E100's tracks stay intact right after the landing. So, conclusion, no, a Spall liner does in no way reduce fall damage or get involved into taking fall damage at all, since as proven by the test results, the two main factors of taking fall damage are the way you land your tank and RNG. So therefore it's pretty safe to say that this myth is busted. Myth number 4. Water reduces your shell's penetration value. So I found this one to be rather interesting as well, since if you were to fire a bullet in water and in air in real life, obviously the bullet in water gets slowed down and loses a lot more of its penetration capabilities because water is more dense than air, of course. But is this also the case in World of Tanks? Well, let's find out. So to test this myth out, I needed an armor plate of any thickness together with a gun that has just enough penetration to go through that armor on land, so that it wouldn't have enough penetration anymore to penetrate that same armor plate underwater if water does indeed slows down your shells a lot more. So therefore I decided to go with the Caernarvon's 109mm effective thickness of its lower plate, and with the Grant's 75mm gun with 109mm of APCR penetration, which means that on land the Grant should have exactly a 50-50 chance of penetrating the Caernarvon's lower plate, because of the penetration RNG that World of Tanks has. But if the Caernarvon's lower plate were to be underwater, and if water on World of Tanks would actually decrease penetration, the Grant would have a less than 50-50 or no chance of penetration that same plate of armor while it's underwater. So let's find out if that is really the case or not. Therefore we went out to Malinovka because of the map's various depths in its middle lake, and I firstly started to put some shots into the lower plate of the Caernarvon on land, and as expected about 50% of the shots penetrated. But once the Caernarvon started to move its lower plate underwater, things got a little weird, because instead of decreasing the Grant's penetration, it looked like the water actually increased the Grant's penetration, since now I was panning roughly 80% of my shots instead of the 50% on land. So this result was very weird indeed, and it could also be because of the shallower angle I had on the Caernarvon's lower plate, but now looking back at the test footage, it seems like the angle stayed the same, and if not got steeper, because I stayed roughly the same height, and the Caernarvon actually moved down a little in order to submerge its lower plate into the water. So that way the angle should actually be steeper, thus it should actually be harder for me to penetrate it if there wasn't even water at the first place. So conclusion, weirdly enough the exact opposite happened of what I expected, because instead of the water reducing my penetration value, it actually seemed to increase it for some weird reason. But this could also be a case of simple impact angling, so I guess I have to do some more in-depth testing on this to know for sure. So who knows, maybe you'll see a 2.0 version in the next episode. Anyways, that does not affect the outcome of this myth, of course, since this myth is clearly busted. So guys, that was all for today's Mythbusters episodes. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, please consider dropping a like. That would be very much appreciated. And also, if you're new to the channel and you like my videos, then make sure to smack that subscribe button so you will stay up to date with all my future content. And also, if you know any awesome myth that hasn't been tested out yet, then feel free to drop it in the comment section down below or in the hashtag myths channel on my Discord server. Link in the description. And who knows, you might see your myth pop up in the next episode. But for now, all that's left for me to say is have an awesome day, and I'll catch you guys later.